Should Nintendo be improving some of their DLC practices? Should we be worried as Nintendo fans that they might go down the wrong path? Now, if you guys remember, I put up a somewhat controversial piece last year about the potential of Nintendo becoming EA. And I was focused more so on things like the Smash Bros. DLC and then the microtransactions and loot boxes they did in things like Fire Emblem Heroes, which is built around the gacha mechanics, and Animal Crossing New Leaf, or an Animal Crossing Pocket Camp with the Leaf tickets. Now, understandably, some people didn't really care because those are mobile games, even though they're Nintendo games. And Nintendo's Furukawa has recently come out and said he wants to create a more stabilized, consistent revenue from mobile that is constant. And, well, microtransaction loot boxes are how you do that. And if that fails, what's to stop them from doing it in their console games? But I'm not actually here to talk about Nintendo potentially becoming EA, nor am I here to talk about the loot boxes and all that stuff. Instead, I'm here to actually talk about DLC in particular. So not the microtransaction type, not the loot box kind, but actually just standard paid DLC. Now, Nintendo has some very good paid DLC. I think we need to acknowledge that fact. The Torna DLC for Xenoblade Chronicles 2, excellent piece of DLC. Excellent piece of standalone content. The DLC that they originally had for Mario Kart 8 back on Wii U, excellent DLC, amazing stuff. The DLC that they actually released for Splatoon 2 in the Octo expansion. That's right, they even called it an expansion because of how much content there was. Excellent, amazing. That's the kind of stuff we want to see Nintendo do, and I'm hoping they are reaping the monetary benefits of providing high-quality content for a somewhat premium price of about $20. But that's not the only kind of DLC practices Nintendo has been practicing as a company. I'm going to pick out two specific examples here because they pertain directly to Switch, directly to stuff that's relevant today, and directly to some of the best games Switch has. That being Xenoblade Chronicles 2, that has that aforementioned amazing DLC, and Breath of the Wild. In Xenoblade Chronicles 2, when you glance at what you're able to purchase after you buy the game, you're going to see things like paid quests and bonus items. You'll see quality of life features like difficulty modes, although, to be fair, the game does have kind of an easy mode included without spending any extra money, but there's extra difficulties on top of that. You have abilities to alter enemy, aggression. You can automatically do quick time events, like automatic battling, which is in the game, but now they charge to make it a single button press instead of going through menus. It's a really weird style of DLC that Nintendo's charging you for. Things that don't really feel like should be charged for. Is it as ridiculous as Activision with, the latest Call of Duty game charging for a red reticule? No, it's not quite that bad, but it's not really a whole lot better either. Charging for difficulty modes, charging for quests in a game that's built around quests. I mean, it'd be one thing if it's like part of a larger DLC pack like Torna, but just to add some more quests in, give us some money in a standalone single-player game really doesn't make a lot of sense. And then, charging to take what you can go through the menu system to automate your attacks to a button press, and you have to charge for that? It's hard for me to sit back and think that these are okay practices, that these are anything other than greedy practices put in place to try to monetize as much as they can out of the million-plus people who bought Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And what sucks is Xenoblade Chronicles 2 has the good kind of DLC in the Torna stuff. Even if you don't like how Torna progresses and how it forces you into doing side quests so you can level up, I get it. Not everyone's going to be into that. But at least you can say you're getting plenty of content for the money. You're not being charged just for an extra side quest here or there. You're not being charged for an extra difficulty setting. You're getting a true expansion to the game. Or in this case, a prequel expansion to the game. Breath of the Wild is even more interesting. I've been on the fence on whether or not I thought Breath of the Wild's DLC was good or not, because there was two specific DLC packs that you could purchase, and you buy them together for $20. And on the whole, when you combine everything together, it seems like a lot of stuff. But there were things in the DLC that bothered me. Let me give you an example. A new difficulty mode. They put what they have been given to us for free in that hero style mode. They call it master mode, but in the past it was just called hero mode. Something you could unlock after beating the game in prior games, like Skyward Sword. They took that mode and said, hey, please pay us for it. Oh, and by the way, there's actually like an additional difficulty mode on top of that, but you have to buy the Ganondorf amiibo. So you have a difficulty mode locked behind a paywall, and another difficulty mode locked behind an amiibo, which is essentially a paywall. So two difficulties behind paywalls. That doesn't make any sense to me. Why take something you've been giving customers for free and lock it behind paywalls, if not just to make people spend money on that paywall? Now, they also added a quest line in the game that offered fast travel freedom, such as calling your horse from anywhere. It's an optional quest, but it's only available if you buy the DLC. You cannot just, default in the game, you can't call your horse from anywhere, but if you complete this quest chain that's only available in the DLC, you can call your horse from anywhere. You can leave your horse at the bottom of a tower, you can jump off that tower, fly way far away, and still call your horse to you. This would actually make horse travel more convenient and more usable. Yeah, I get it. Maybe horse travel was only meant to go from stable to stable as you're unlocking the map and all that. I get that. Maybe that was the intent. But there are many times in the game that if I could have just freely called a horse to me, I would have actually used horses more than just simply running across a field because I happen to ditch my horse on the other side of the mountain. It's one of those quality of life improvements to the game that Nintendo put behind a paywall. And you want to know what's even worse with Breath of the Wild? Hero's Path. They touted this as an interesting feature of DLC, where there is a pathing on the map that'll track where you have been in the game. Now, they did mention, if you paid attention to some interviews, that they actually had this working in development so they could actually track what players were doing and if they needed to add certain things to the map to get players to maybe explore more of that map. The idea was to figure out where their test group is going and how they are exploring, and they later realized this would be a fun thing for the end user to have. And when that is enabled, this is where it gets really weird. When it's enabled, it's able to track all of your travel before the DLC launch, which means the game was already tracking where your data went. You just had to pay to access it. Think about this for a moment. Think about what we're talking about. We're talking about Xenoblade Chronicles 2 with difficulty modes behind a paywall, with bonus items and paid quests behind a paywall, very similar to other microtransactions you see in some games. We're talking about auto time, quick time events, and of course, taking an option that's already in the game and making it easier to access. For some reason, we have to pay to do that. We're talking about Breath of the Wild putting difficulty modes behind two individual separate types of paywalls. We're talking about, a quest line that makes the game better in terms of using your horse locked behind a paywall. And we're talking about pathing tracking on a map that is already occurring in the game, having to pay to just access the data the game is already tracking. All of these are DLC practices that are utterly ridiculous. And these are the kind of things you would not be surprised to see out of an EA game, or an Activision game, or maybe even an Ubisoft game. But Nintendo? Nintendo, the one with the Octo expansion and the Torna DLC? The one that offers free updates for ARMS all the way through the past year? This is a Nintendo that worries me. This is the Nintendo that makes me remember that they aren't immune to crappy, shoddy, and greedy practices when it comes to their DLC. This is a Nintendo that reminds me why I'm kind of scared for Animal Crossing on Switch. After all, they just did loot boxes in Pocket Camp. What's to stop that from being in the new Animal Crossing 2, a game built around cosmetic items? Remember, Animal Crossing, a lot of what you do in the game is to earn cosmetic items for your house and for your character. A game primed for microtransactions and DLC. A game primed for Nintendo to take advantage of people this way. If they were willing to do it in one of their biggest IPs in Zelda, if they were willing to do it in Xenoblade, what's to stop them from doing it more? Because they didn't do it with costumes in Mario Odyssey, we shouldn't worry about this? It's something to ponder, isn't it? Now remember, I don't know what Nintendo's going to do. I don't know if we're going to see these practices more often. What I do know is they sold the heck of a lot of that Zelda DLC. They sold the heck of a lot of this stuff in Xenoblade Chronicles too. And I bet you Nintendo is laughing to the bank on some of these things being behind a paywall. So the question I pose to you guys is, should we be worried about some of these practices from Nintendo? Again, they have good practices and they have negative practices, and sometimes you got to take the good with the bad. But sometimes these bad practices just don't really make sense. Even if, like Master Mode, wasn't ready to go for Breath of the Wild at launch, why couldn't it be added later as a free patch if you were planning to put it in? And should we buy that Master Mode wasn't ready when the difficulty mode that's locked behind the Ganondorf amiibo clearly was? I think there is a lot to think about when it comes to Nintendo's practices as a video game maker. Nintendo using some more modern tactics to monetize things, and then using maybe some more old school tactics with expansion pack like DLC. So what can Nintendo do? I don't know. There hasn't been a lot of attention paid to these practices. Yeah, some people called them out at the time, but then it kind of went away. And that's really why these practices continue to thrive in the industry. They become big topics at the time. You know, the big topic on Assassin's Creed charging for XP boost. No one's really talking about that anymore, are they? No one's talking about Breath of the Wild charging for difficulty modes and for a pathing on a map that looked really neat at the time, but until you realize the game's already doing it, so why are we paying for it? Something to think about on your lovely Sunday in this beginning of January, as they're about to release New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe over the next week. That's the same game they already gave us on Wii U, with the extra Luigi U DLC. And what? Peachette? Super Crown? It's only usable with one character? Don't get me wrong, I don't have an issue with Wii U ports, and I think ports are a completely separate conversation, but it does make you wonder a little bit. Nintendo's not perfect. And I don't expect them to be. But I do expect us as consumers to at least call them out at times when maybe they're not exactly being the most pro-consumer. So I don't want to start 2019 on a sour note. I think there's been enough crappy things that happen in the world as is. But I don't want us to forget that Nintendo has done these practices as we enter the year of 2019 that's going to see a ton of Nintendo Switch exclusive games. So when these practices pop up in Luigi's Mansion 3, or when they pop up in Animal Crossing, or Daemon X Machina, or whatever, Yoshi's Crafted World, then maybe we don't be so surprised they're happening, and instead remember that Nintendo's already been practicing this stuff in the first place, and maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't be spending our money to support such things. I'm not saying boycott games. I'm not saying don't buy a game because of these practices. But I will say, maybe, just maybe, if we do buy the game and those practices exist, we don't then purchase the things that support those practices. And hey, I'm guilty of it in Breath of the Wild, for sure. I spent money on that DLC. I put my faith in Nintendo that they weren't going to do something silly. And then they did. And I felt bad that I gave them my money to support an ideal with content that should have been free. Or at least should have been in the game from the get-go. But what do I know? I'm just a talking head on the internet. My thoughts, my opinions, they probably don't matter to many of you. That's why I actually want to hear your thoughts and your opinions. Because I'm just one person. I'm a fart in the wind. But together, we can make it pretty smelly for Nintendo. So much so, they want to bring out the air freshener and do DLC right. Anyways, folks, I'm Nathaniel Rovajans from Nintendo Prime. Go down to the comments and let me know what you think about this video, about this topic, about Nintendo's DLC practices. Also, be sure to go on and enter our Nintendo Switch Super Smash Bros. Ultimate Bundle giveaway through the Gleam.io link. It's absolutely free. All that's required is that you subscribe to the channel. Beyond that, stay happy, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.